Hey everyone, and welcome. So if you're gearing up for the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Professional exam, you already know it's a beast. Today we're going to do a deep dive into what is, let's be honest, probably its toughest section, Domain 1, which is all about designing for organizational complexity. So why are we zeroing in on this one domain? Well, look at this number, 26%. That's its weight on the SAP CO2 exam. Let that sink in for a second. Over a quarter of your entire grade hangs on this one single area. The stakes are just incredibly high. Getting this right isn't just a good idea, it's absolutely non-negotiable if you want to pass. I know, it sounds a little vague, right? Organizational complexity. But it's not just about knowing a bunch of AWS services. No, it's about how you apply them at a massive enterprise scale. It's about juggling all these competing demands, security, cost, performance, resilience, all at the same time across a huge, sprawling company. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. All right, here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with who this exam is really for. Then we'll get into the big technical pillars: networking, security, managing a ton of accounts, and keeping costs in check. And then, most importantly, we'll wrap up by talking about how to shift your thinking to actually crush it on exam day. Okay, first things first, let's get one thing straight. This exam is not for beginners. This is not your entry-level certification. Think of it as a validation of serious, deep, real-world experience. So let's take a look at who AWS actually builds this test for. The official guide doesn't mess around. They're looking for at least 2 years of hands-on experience, and not just using services, but actively designing and implementing solutions with them. The real key here, and what the exam tests over and over, is your ability to make architectural recommendations. It's about your judgment and your ability to provide guidance. This isn't a trivia contest about API calls. It's a test of your decision-making. All right, let's dive into our first major technical area, networking, but on a massive scale. See, when you're hooking up a whole global enterprise to the cloud, you've got some pretty fundamental choices to make, and you can bet the exam is going to test you on them. So how do you make the call? It always comes down to the business requirements. The pro exam is all about trade-offs, and this right here is a classic one. A question might describe a scenario, say, a high-frequency trading application that needs super consistent, low-latency, big-time bandwidth. Well, that just screams direct connect, right? It's your own private, physical fiber line into AWS. But what if the scenario is about setting up a new remote office quickly and affordably? Well, then an AWS VPN over the public internet is the smarter call. Knowing which to pick, and more importantly, why, is a core pro-level skill. Okay, next up, we need to talk about designing systems that don't just work on a sunny day. We have to architect systems that can take a punch and get back up. This is really where we move beyond just building stuff and start architecting for the real, messy world where things break. Every single conversation about disaster recovery, or DR, starts with these two metrics, RPO and RTO. An exam question isn't going to just say, make this resilient. No way. It's going to give you clues. It'll say something like, the business has stipulated that no more than 15 minutes of transaction data can ever be lost. Boom. That's your RPO. Or, the e-commerce site must be fully operational within 1 hour of an outage. And there's your RTO. Literally every architectural choice you make for DR flows from these two numbers. So, based on those RPO and RTO numbers, you pick a strategy. For workloads that aren't mission critical, backup and restore is a super common and very cost-effective approach. You're using something like AWS Backup for your data and CloudFormation to automatically spin up your infrastructure from code if things go wrong. So what's the catch? The trade-off is time. This method is slower, meaning it has a higher RTO and RPO than other, more expensive strategies. The exam is testing if you can match this cost-effective option to the right business need. As companies get bigger, they don't just have one AWS account. They might have hundreds, maybe thousands. So how on earth do you manage all of that without it turning into total chaos? This is way beyond managing a single VPC. We're talking about true enterprise-level governance. The answer, and you absolutely need to burn this name into your brain for the exam, is AWS Control Tower. The best way to think about it is this. Instead of letting hundreds of teams build their own houses with their own weird rules, Control Tower is like the city planner. It helps you build a well-organized city from the start. It automates the whole setup of a secure multi-account landing zone, giving you that central governance right from day one. So what does this planned city actually look like? Well, as a pro architect, you're expected to design a model that covers these key things. You need a logical way to structure your accounts, maybe by department or by environment like dev, test, and prod. You've got to have centralized logging and security alerts, so you have that single pane of glass to see what's happening everywhere. And of course, you need clear strategies for sharing things and managing who can access what across all those accounts using IAM. And that brings us to a topic that really separates the pros from the associates: cost. Because at this level, it's just not good enough to build something that works. You have to build something that is financially smart and optimized for the business's bottom line. Architecture meets finance. Your number one tool in this fight is AWS Cost Explorer. I mean, you can't optimize what you can't see, right? Cost Explorer is what lets you get in there and slice and dice your spending, spot trends, and figure out exactly where the money is going, especially in a really complex multi-account setup. It is always the starting point for any real cost optimization plan. And once you have that visibility, you can build a strategy. The exam will expect you to know how to put together a full plan. We're talking about proactive things, like using AWS budgets to get alerts before you overspend. It's about strategically using managed services so your teams are writing less boilerplate code. And of course, it's about choosing the right pricing models, like savings plans, and digging into those often overlooked costs, like data transfer. That's a classic exam gotcha, by the way. So we've gone over the core technical stuff. But just knowing what these services are is not enough to pass. The last piece of this puzzle, and maybe the most important, is how you apply all this knowledge. It really is about adopting a whole new mindset. I love this quote I found on Reddit because it just hits the nail on the head. On the pro exam, you will constantly face questions where 2, 3, maybe even 4 answers are technically correct. They would all work. Your job is to be a detective. You have to read that long scenario and find the hidden driver. Is the business bleeding money? Then the most cost-effective solution is the best one. Are they in the healthcare industry? Then security and compliance are king. It's not about finding a correct answer. It's about finding the best answer for that specific story. So how do you develop that kind of thinking? Well, it's definitely not by just reading books. The consensus from people who've passed is that you need to spend the majority of your time, maybe 60%, getting your hands dirty in the console, build things, and more importantly, break things. The other 40% should be dedicated to high-quality practice exams that really mimic the complexity of the real thing. You're building architectural muscle memory. And that really leaves us with this final critical question you need to ask yourself. The pro exam is a fundamental shift in perspective. It stops being about what does this one service do, and it becomes how do I conduct this entire orchestra of services to solve a massive business problem. It's the difference between connecting services and truly designing architectures. And when you can honestly answer yes to this question, you'll know you're ready. Hey everyone, and welcome to Spidey Pulse Podcast. Today, we're going to tackle one of the absolute biggest parts of the AWS Solutions Architect Professional exam: how you design a great solution when you're basically starting from scratch. This is where you really earn your title, so let's get into it. So why are we focusing so hard on this? Well, look at that number. This one single domain, designing new solutions, is worth a staggering 29% of your exam score. Yeah, you heard that right. Nearly a third of your entire grade is riding on this. And just so we're all on the same page, what we're talking about is officially called Content Domain 2, Design for New Solutions. But look, this isn't about memorizing a list of services. It's a test of how you think, how you connect the dots, and how you build something that's strong, safe, and smart from the ground up. This is the real challenge. To get our heads around this, we're going to use what I call the architect's blueprint. We'll start by understanding the core challenge. Then we'll build our design using 4 critical pillars: staying online, building the fortress, designing for demands, and of course, balancing the books. Finally, we'll tie it all together with the most important part: the architect's mindset. Okay, first up, the architect's challenge. You gotta understand, this domain isn't a memory test. It's a thinking test. It's what separates someone who just uses AWS from someone who truly architects on AWS. They'll give you a business problem, and your job is to design the right solution, not just the first one that comes to mind. All right, let's lay our first foundation stone. Pillar 1, staying online. Because business continuity, it's just not optional. Let's be real, things will go wrong. It's not a matter of if, but when. And your design has to be ready to handle it without skipping a beat. And when we talk about disaster recovery, these two little acronyms, RTO and RPO, are everything. They drive almost every single decision. RTO is your clock. How fast do you need to be back up and running? RPO is your data ledger. How much information can you afford to lose? A few seconds? An hour? The business gives you these numbers, and those numbers define your technical path. And based on that RTO and RPO, you choose a strategy from this spectrum here. On one end, you have backup and restore. It's slow, it's cheap, and it's totally fine for non-critical systems. Way over on the other end, you've got multi-site active-active, which gives you almost zero downtime. But yeah, it comes with a serious price tag. The art of architecture is picking the right spot on that line for the job. Okay, our foundation is solid. Our solution can survive a disaster. Now, we build the walls. Pillar 2 is all about building the fortress. You see, security can't be an afterthought. It's not something you just sprinkle on at the end. It has to be woven into the very DNA of your design from the first moment. So what does that really look like? Well, you're thinking in layers. You start with identity, locking down IAM roles with the principle of least privilege. Nobody gets more access than they absolutely need. Then you control the traffic flow with security groups and network ACLs. They're like your digital bouncers. You encrypt everything, data just sitting there and data flying across the network. And you plan for the worst with tools to mitigate attacks. Now, this is a perfect example of a classic architectural trade-off. Do you use Direct Connect or a VPN? A VPN is cost-effective, but you're going over the public internet. Direct Connect gives you a private, dedicated pipe. It's way faster, way more secure, and way more expensive. Which is the right answer? Well, you know what I'm going to say. It depends entirely on the business requirements for security and performance. Okay, on to pillar number 3. So our solution is online and it's secure. Fantastic. But can it handle the heat? Can it perform when traffic suddenly spikes? This is all about designing for demands, making sure your application is fast, reliable, and ready to scale. You know, the magic words here are elasticity and decoupling. You don't build for peak traffic all the time. That's a waste of money. You build a system that can scale up automatically when it needs to, and then scale right back down. You use tools like queues to decouple services, so if one part fails, it doesn't take the whole ship down with it. And you use things like caching, replicas, and always choosing the right purpose-built tool for the job. And that brings us to the final, and let's be honest, often the most critical pillar, balancing the books. Because the most brilliant technical solution on the planet is completely useless if the business can't afford to run it. Cost is a design constraint, period. So you have to build cost optimization into your design from day one. It starts with choosing the right size and type of resources, no over-provisioning. Then pick the smartest pricing model. Are you going to use savings plans or spot instances? Then you architect to keep data transfer costs low. And finally, you put guardrails in place like AWS budgets to keep an eye on everything. So now we've got our 4 pillars, but what holds it all together? Well, that's the final piece, the architect's mindset. The real skill of a pro is being able to synthesize all 4 of these pillars, reliability, security, performance, and cost, into one elegant, coherent design. And this right here, this is probably the most important thing to remember for the exam. There are often a dozen technically correct ways to build something, but the exam is testing your ability to find the right way for a specific scenario. You have to read the business problem like a detective. Is the biggest priority cost, or is it ultra-low latency? Your design has to reflect that perfect balance. And hey, don't just take my word for it. This quote from someone who recently passed the exam says it all. You can't just memorize what services do. You have to understand the trade-offs. You have to get the why behind your choices. That is the absolute core of making architectural decisions. So there you have it, the architect's blueprint for designing new solutions. It's a framework that balances all the competing needs, staying online, staying secure, performing under pressure, and staying on budget. The blueprint is in your hands. The only question is, are you ready to build?
Welcome to The Explainer from the team at Spidey Podcast. You know, if you're tackling the AWS Solutions Architect Professional exam, you already know it is a beast. In this explainer, we are zeroing in on one of the most critical domains, one that really separates a good architect from a great one: the constant, ongoing refinement of the solutions you've already built.
So picture this. You've done it. The architecture is designed, the resources are provisioned, the application is live. You're getting high fives, the project is officially done, right? Well, not really. For a professional architect, that's just the starting line. The real question is, what happens next?
Because here's the thing about the cloud. Nothing is static, ever. Your usage patterns are going to change, new AWS services will pop up, and the business goals, they're always evolving. This is where continuous improvement comes in. And it's not just some phase of a project, it's a mindset. It's a set of practices that make sure your architecture stays effective, efficient, and resilient for its entire life.
Okay, so let's dive into this idea of the never-ending project. Thinking of a cloud solution as a one-and-done build is honestly a huge mistake. You've got to think of it like a living system, and your job is to be its chief caretaker, constantly on the lookout for ways to make it better.
And it's not just me saying this is important. AWS thinks so too. Just look at the weight this carries on the SAP CO2 exam. Designing brand new solutions is obviously crucial, but continuously improving existing ones, that makes up a massive 25% of your total score. A full quarter. This is not an afterthought. It is a core competency they're absolutely testing for.
So today, we're going to break this domain down into 4 key areas. We'll kick things off with the big user-facing pillars, reliability and performance. Then, we'll tackle that business-critical challenge of cost optimization. After that, we'll get into what it really takes to achieve operational excellence. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the essential mindset every architect needs to succeed.
All right, let's get started with reliability and performance. Seriously, these are 2 sides of the exact same coin, and that coin is user experience. A system that's down is completely useless, and a system that's slow, well, it feels like it's down, doesn't it? Both of these things destroy user trust and can hit the business right where it hurts.
So, your mission as an architect is to become a detective. You have to hunt down these failures before they can happen and crush performance bottlenecks before they ever even get close to your users. This means you're building for resilience and for speed from day one, and you never, ever stop tuning.
The exam guide gives us a clear roadmap here. You have to be able to spot and eliminate those single points of failure. This means you're doing things like replicating data across multiple availability zones, building self-healing mechanisms with services like auto-scaling, and you gotta have a bulletproof backup and restore plan using something like AWS Backup. And just as important, you have to be analyzing usage trends to see what's coming next.
Let's look at a classic scenario, hybrid connectivity. How do you reliably connect your on-prem data center to AWS? You've got options, and this perfectly illustrates the kind of trade-offs an architect has to make every day. On one hand, you have AWS Direct Connect. This gives you a private, dedicated physical line into AWS. It's fast, it has super low latency, and it's incredibly secure because it bypasses the public internet. The trade-off? It's more complex and it costs more to set up. On the other hand, a site-to-site VPN is way more cost-effective and easier to configure, but it runs over the public internet. That means higher, less predictable latency. Choosing the right one, it depends entirely on the business requirements for performance and reliability.
Improving performance follows a pretty similar methodical process. First, you identify the bottlenecks, and then you test potential fixes. Second, and this is a key strategy, you offload work to AWS Managed Services. I mean, why build your own global traffic management system when you can use AWS Global Accelerator? Why manage your own caching layer when Amazon CloudFront can do it for you right at the edge? And third, you have to constantly assess your solution against performance metrics and right-size your resources.
And all this focus on efficiency and right-sizing leads us perfectly into our next pillar, cost. And this is a big one. For so many organizations, the greatest benefit of the cloud is also its greatest danger, that pay-as-you-go model. If you're not vigilant, costs can spiral out of control fast. This right here is the pain point for so many engineering leaders and CFOs. We've all heard the horror stories, right? A developer leaves an oversized EC2 instance running over the weekend, or a sudden data transfer spike results in a shocking bill. The architect's role is to bring predictability and control back to cloud spending.
Thankfully, you don't have to fly blind. AWS provides a really powerful suite of native tools to tackle this head-on. It gives you all the visibility and control you need right there in the console.
Knowing your toolkit here is absolutely crucial, and you can think of it like a process. First, you use AWS Cost Explorer to see where the money is actually going. Then, you set up AWS budgets to get alerted and prevent overspending. For those nasty surprises, cost anomaly detection acts like your automated watchdog. And finally, the cost optimization hub puts all the potential savings in one place, giving you a clear, prioritized action plan.
Okay, now let's talk about operational excellence. This is all about how you run and monitor your systems to deliver business value effectively. A perfectly designed architecture is basically useless if it's too difficult or risky to operate and update.
Oh, we've all seen this. Deployments that are totally manual, prone to errors, and take hours or even days. And when something breaks, it's an all-hands-on-deck fire drill just to figure out what happened. This operational chaos is not only stressful, it slows down innovation and introduces a ton of unnecessary risk.
So, what's the solution? Well, AWS defines operational excellence as the ability not just to run your systems, but to continuously improve the processes around them. It's all about making your operations repeatable, predictable, and safe.
And you guessed it, AWS provides the building blocks. Comprehensive monitoring with Amazon CloudWatch is non-negotiable. You can't improve what you can't measure. Automating tasks like patching and configuration with AWS Systems Manager just slashes manual errors. Defining your infrastructure as code with tools like CloudFormation ensures you can deploy consistently every single time. And finally, implementing mature CI/CD pipelines allows you to deploy changes safely. Using a strategy like blue/green, where you deploy to a parallel idle environment before switching traffic, means you can release updates with minimal risk and basically zero downtime.
This brings us to our final section, and this is the one that ties everything together. We've talked about tools, we've talked about strategies, but honestly, none of it matters without the right mindset.
I just love this quote from a discussion among certified pros. The SAP SEO2 exam, and frankly, real-world architecture, it's not about memorizing the names of 100 AWS services. It is about deeply understanding the underlying principles. It's about knowing why you would choose one solution over another based on a very specific set of requirements.
Ultimately, this is the job. Every single architectural decision is a trade-off. Do you prioritize performance over cost? Reliability over operational simplicity? A professional solutions architect lives in this world, balancing these competing demands, and they can clearly explain the reasoning behind their decisions. That is what continuous improvement is all about, constantly reevaluating those trade-offs as the world around you changes.
So I want to leave you with this question. Think about a system you're working on right now. Based on everything we've just talked about, what's one small improvement in reliability, performance, cost, or operations that you can plan for today? Because that's how it starts. One small, continuous improvement at a time.
Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're going to crack open one of the toughest but most important domains for anyone serious about cloud architecture: how to accelerate workload migration and modernization on AWS. This isn't just some textbook theory, folks. This is the heart and soul of what a solutions architect professional does every single day, and it's a massive piece of that certification exam. So here's the game plan. We'll kick things off with the real-world headaches of migration. Then we'll look at how the AWS Pro exam itself gives us a blueprint to follow. After that, we'll explore the big migration paths you have to choose from, dive deep into the modern tools you'll use, figure out how to connect everything together, and then wrap it all up with the one thing you really need to take away. Let's get right into it. All right, first things first, let's really frame the problem here. You hear moving to the cloud, and it sounds kind of simple, right? But the reality is, it's so much more complicated than just picking up servers from one place and dropping them in another. I want you to really think about that for a second. If you've ever been near one of these projects, you know it's almost never a straight line. This question, right here, this is the whole reason professional cloud architects have a job. It's our job to answer this. You know, the biggest assumption people make is that it's just a digital moving van. But the reality? Oh, it's a whole different universe. You can't just move an old app and expect it to perform well. You have to re-architect it to leverage the cloud's power. Your old security model, you got to throw it out and design for a world where the network is hostile. And cost? It's not a one-and-done thing. It's a constant process of tuning and optimizing. And really, at the end of the day, this whole exercise is about changing what a business is even capable of doing. So, how on earth do you deal with all that complexity? Well, turns out the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Professional exam, the SAP C22, gives us the perfect framework. It's not just a test, it's the blueprint for how to think like a pro. The official exam guide breaks the entire job down into these 4 key areas. And for our purposes today, we are zooming in laser-focused on that last one: accelerate workload migration and modernization. This is where the old world meets the new world. And please do not underestimate this. We're talking about a full 20% of your final score on one of the hardest exams in tech. AWS is basically screaming from the rooftops that if you want to be a senior architect, you have to be an expert at this. It's non-negotiable. This brings us to the first huge fork in the road for any architect. You've got this existing application sitting in a data center somewhere. How are you actually going to get it to the cloud? There is no single right answer. There are paths, and you have to choose one. I absolutely love this analogy because it just makes perfect sense. Think about it. Do you just pack up all your old heavy furniture and cram it into your new modern house? Sure, it's fast, but it's probably not going to look right or fit well. Or do you take the time and effort to get new stuff that's designed perfectly for that new space? It takes longer, but the result is way, way better. So here's how AWS breaks down that choice into 3 main strategies. First up, you've got lift and shift, also called rehosting. This is the quick and dirty approach. You use a tool like the Application Migration Service and just move your servers over, warts and all. Then there's the middle ground, replatforming. Here you make a few small, smart changes like swapping out your on-premise database for Amazon RDS. And finally, the big one, re-architecting. This is the go big or go home option where you rebuild the application from the ground up using cloud-native stuff like containers and serverless. It's the most work, but it gives you the biggest payoff. And that last strategy, re-architecting, leads us straight into our next topic, the modern toolkit. Because let's be honest, the goal isn't just to move to the cloud, it's to thrive in the cloud. And that means building for the future. The first huge tool in that kit is containers. The best way to think about it is like a standard shipping container for your code. It bundles up your application and all its dependencies into one neat, tidy package. That package can then run consistently anywhere, which is a total game changer. And the exam guide is super clear about what you need to know here. AWS gives you a whole family of services. You've got their native orchestrator, ECS, and then you have EKS for all the Kubernetes fans out there. Then there's Fargate, which is magic. It lets you run containers without even thinking about servers. And of course, ECR, which is where you store all your container images. Knowing when to use which is absolutely critical. Okay, so the other side of the modernization coin is serverless. This is a huge mental shift. Instead of having a big application running 24/7 on a server, you break it down into tiny little functions. And here's the magic part. They only run, and you only pay for them, when something actually triggers them. Now here's the thing. AWS Lambda is the star of the show. It's the engine that runs your code, but it can't do it alone. It's all these other integration services, like SQS for queues, SNS for notifications, and EventBridge for routing events, that act like the connective tissue. They're what lets you build these incredible, modern applications that are super resilient. Okay, but let's get real for a minute. Nobody just flips a switch and moves a whole company to the cloud overnight. Most businesses live in a hybrid world for years, with one foot on-premise and one foot in AWS. And to make that work, you need a solid, secure bridge between those two worlds. And this slide perfectly lays out the 2 main ways to build that bridge, and you will absolutely be tested on this. On one hand, you have AWS Direct Connect. Think of this as your own private, dedicated fiber optic superhighway that goes straight from your data center to AWS. It's incredibly fast and secure, but it's pricey and takes time to set up. On the other hand, you have the AWS VPN. Think of this as driving an armored car over the public internet. It's way cheaper and faster to get going, but your speed and reliability depend entirely on the traffic on that public internet. And this is exactly why this matters. The exam, just like the real world, is all about making trade-offs. You're never just asked what's the best tech. You're given a messy business problem. We need to move tons of data, and it has to be super low latency. And you have to defend your choice. Justifying Direct Connect, even with its higher cost, is peak architect thinking. Okay, so let's bring it all home with the single most important point of this entire explainer. You can memorize every AWS service out there, but to pass the pro exam and to be a great architect, you need something more. You need a certain way of thinking. I found this quote from a veteran architect on Reddit, and it just hits the nail on the head. If you just try to memorize facts, you will fail. The exam throws complicated, real-world business problems at you. Your job is to pick apart the requirements, is cost king or is it performance, and then choose the most appropriate solution for that specific scenario. You have to understand the why behind your decisions, not just the how. Because ultimately, that's what this is all about. Migration and modernization isn't just a tech project. It's about deeply understanding a business, carefully weighing all the trade-offs, and then using this amazing set of tools to build something that pushes the entire organization forward. You're not just a techie, you're an architect of the future.